President Biden and my support for the people of Ukraine is unwavering. We support Ukraine not out of charity, but because the people of Ukraine and their future is in our strategic interest.
Vice President Kamala Harris at an international peace conference in Switzerland this weekend, where 80 countries called for the territorial integrity of Ukraine to be a part of any potential peace deal to end the two-year war with Russia. The U.S. announcing an additional $1.5 billion in assistance for Ukraine's energy sector, humanitarian needs, and civilian security. Joining me now is former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO and MSNBC Chief International Analyst, Admiral James Stavridis. Always a pleasure to have you, sir. So, at this peace summit, Kyiv said it's not going to engage in direct negotiations with Russia, but is working to build a coalition of countries that maintain relations with Russia, that includes China, to put pressure on Moscow to agree to a peace proposal. First, what's your response to this? And what do you think Russia-aligned countries can do to persuade Moscow to agree to Ukraine's terms?
The single word answer to the question is China. In other words, Ukraine has got to get President Xi Jinping to agree to significantly intercede with Vladimir Putin if there's any chance for a peaceful conclusion to this. And the reason, Alex, is that China has emerged not only as the financial backing of Russia, permitting them into any number of economic lifelines, but secondly, as President Biden pointed out over the last week, China has been providing not direct military weapons, but the components to make those weapons, significantly microchips, for example, to Russia. So I think it is a smart strategy on the part of the Ukrainians, try and build a global sense that this war needs to stop and to put pressure on Putin. But until China gets on board that train, the train will not leave the station.
Interesting. 80 countries, and yet it all comes down to China. Vladimir Putin put forward his own ceasefire proposal, calling for complete withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from Russian-occupied, currently occupied territories, of which I believe there are 4, and for then Ukraine to abandon plans to join NATO. Now, Ukraine called these demands absurd. Russia was noticeably absent at this peace summit this weekend. So is Putin genuinely interested in peace? And if not, what is he doing?
As the Prime Minister of Italy, Prime Minister Meloni, who was a headliner at the G7, really stood out, by the way, in that group of G7 leaders. She said quite bluntly, what Putin is proposing is a propaganda move. I agree with her. I think any normal common sense kind of analysis would tell you that Putin's, quote, peace proposal, end quote, is simply a non-starter. It says, in effect, allow me to keep all of my ill-gotten gains. Let me guarantee that Ukraine will never have a functioning military. Oh, by the way, I want to come out from under the sanctions that have been rightfully imposed on me. I refuse to pay any kind of reparations for destroying 20% of Ukraine, and there cannot be any war crimes tribunals or any accountability. I'd call that a non-starter, and therefore it's simply propaganda for him to say, hey, I've come up with a peace proposal. It's a non-starter.
Yeah. Well, again, Ukraine called it absurd. So we have that as well. So the U.S. is keeping an eye on a fleet of Russian warships. You know, they're docked off the coast of Cuba. They are soon going to carry out some sort of military exercises. Moscow sending these vessels less than 2 weeks after the Biden administration authorized Ukraine to use U.S.-provided weapons against military targets inside Russia. Are these ships, sir, any threat to the U.S., or are they just a display of force? And if these ships pose no threat, why did the U.S. then send a Navy submarine there?
First, as you know, but perhaps others do not, before I became NATO commander and therefore the European NATO kind of guy, I spent almost 4 years as commander of U.S. Southern Command, focused on Latin America and the Caribbean. So I know these waters quite well, if you will. Russia routinely, Alex, sends these small flotillas. There are 3 ships in this group into the Caribbean. Typically, they'll do a port call as they have most recently in Havana. I'd be surprised if they didn't go across the Caribbean to Caracas, Venezuela next, where another dictator resides, Nicolas Maduro. It is a signal. You're absolutely correct, Alex. It's a signal to the United States. But frankly, 3 warships, although these are relatively new warships from the Russian Navy, don't impose any kind of real threat. We, the U.S. Navy, are shadowing them, collecting intelligence. In the end, we'll get more out of this than them. And yes, we sent a nuclear submarine down to our naval base, also on Cuban soil in Guantanamo Bay. And by the way, our allies, the Canadians, had a frigate pull in alongside our ship. So this is normal behavior on the part of Russia, does not pose a significant threat. But yes, it's a signal from Vladimir Putin about his discontent for our correct and righteous support of Ukraine.
Yeah. One show of force meets another, sounds like to me. Admiral James Stavridis, thank you so much, my friend. Well, some